good shape, if this thing goes into foreclosure, you might not get it.
Taking years.
But even if they would do it, you might not get it.
Yeah, that's right.
It's like you're falling apart.
That's right. At a foreclosure.
Incidentally, Steve, your son's going to.
It was just when they were giving up.
North Carolina.
Close.
NC.
Yeah, he's already packing up.
Every once in a while, a company gets
I said that you said that he said not since I was 14 when my wife was married. That's what he said to me.
His oldest brother went to UConn, and his other brother, the middle brother, went to Villanova. So
I thought
That's right.
they all maybe he meant graduate from school.
It wasn't too bad because the rest of the meeting was quick being busy. So, is John? Is he coming? Oh, okay. Oh, here comes a car. Here comes a bunch of cars. Is this, wait, is this, we're being filmed, be careful.
we have to hide.
Did everybody say because Eric and roll their eyes?
Huh? All right. Okay. So I get 2 yes. Does that mean you're coming? All right.
yes, I will.
What's Norwich? They don't have anything. Norwich?
Incredible when you get into it.
Arizona? Oh, they have nothing.
Because they're the only municipality in the state where the city councils own, and that's by special act. They're the only ones that can do that.
We're going to have public comment. That's not going to be a problem.
How are you? Good, that's good to hear. Good to hear.
Does, guess what, by November? Wow.
I thought she said she was saying. I thought that was. Oh, maybe it is. Well, I came back.
I have 7 on the way.
She wasn't coming.
Because
He's an orange woman.
Just needs a feather in the press.
That's right.
I'm trying to stick my business card in there. Falls out.
Everybody ready? Okay. And we ready? Okay. Good evening. Let me call to order this regular meeting of the Ledyard Town Council. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roxanne, would you please call the roll?
Mrs. Davis? Here. Mr. Dombrowski?
Here.
Mr. Eichelberg?
Present.
Mr. France?
Here.
Mr. Marshall? Mrs. McGrattan?
Here.
Mr. Thoms?
Here.
Mr. Sullivan?
Here.
Mrs. Ledyard?
Here.
8 here, 1 absent.
Okay, we have a quorum. Next item on the agenda is to hear from residents and property owners. Are there any wishing to address the council this evening? Yes. Come on. Thank you.
At Monahan, 49 Homestead Road. Indeed, it's Homestead Road that I want to address you about. I have been following assiduously the postings on the Ledyard official website. I'm aware of what North Stonington has alluded to as regard to Lantern Hill Road. And indeed, I was given some insights to a meeting that the mayor and the director of public works had with one or more of the residents on on Long Pond Road South. Our concern is that, having seen the plans for the new dam on Lantern Hill Pond, the new bridge, as it's called, on the border between North Stonington and Ledyard on Lantern Hill Road, we don't quite see how this is going to work. And I speak for myself and I think most of the other residents on Homestead Road. That plan calls for the elevation of Lantern Hill Road to be increased by upwards of up to 4 feet from near the dam on down toward the DEEP boat launch. It also understandably calls for regrading of the north end of Homestead Road. Now, we are assured here that starting about 1 August, the closure is estimated to be required until about September 1st. Access to Homestead Road will be from the north end of Lantern Hill Road. I would really, and again, I think my neighbors would join me, like to have some more specifics as how that's going to happen. It would be, to be candid, one of our concerns is it isn't actually being done by our own Department of Public Works or by DOT or some other state agency. It's being done by the Messentucket Pequot Tribal Nation with BIA funds. And we don't want to be left in the lurch when we can't get out of our homes. We don't have egress for days on end of having to petition the MPTN to find out what's going on. So we would hope that some communication could be set up in a routine way so that all of us who live on Homestead know what to expect a few days in advance. And again, having seen the technical drawings, some 30 odd of them for the construction project, which I said before in this meeting I think looks great, I still would like to see how it's being phased in to accommodate, we expect some problems, but accommodate the residents of Homestead and the adjacent Pentway so that we can get in and out of our homes. Even if we have to go northward, 214 Shoeville and so on to get, say, to Mystic, we understand that, but we just want to be sure. And I know that many of my neighbors are even considerably older than I. They have medical and other issues, and some of them are a little paranoid, but they would like assurance that they or their caregivers will be able to gain access to them, and they in turn can get out of their homes and to their shops. So I thank you, and again, we would appreciate a response from one quarter or another, and if the response comes to me, I will be certain that it will be shared with the other residents on Homestead. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And before you feel free to sit down.
Oh, no, I'm comfortable on my feet.
And I was going to turn to the mayor and ask him if he had a thought about how to proceed and how to respond from here.
As Mr. Monahan said, we did have a meeting this week. It was a related but different concern by some of the landowners who do have where Long Pond Road and Homestead come together. There's I won't even call it a right-of-way, but there is a natural access there that the homeowners have allowed emergency vehicles, police to use. They have a concern that now those residents will use that, and they would like, and so we're working with them to try to make sure that their property is not overused. As far as the actual construction, I have had some conversations with Public Works Director and Engineer Steve Maslin. We recognize that this work is being done by a separate entity, and not even by a contractor to that entity, but by the tribe itself. very unusual situation. However, we are having conversations, and I appreciate it. We will get back to you with some of the details as they go on. We appreciate the fact that it's being done. We know that there was a terrible problem up there with the storms last year, and the road was closed for a significant amount of time then. So I will certainly, within by the next council meeting, have a report. It is certainly our understanding that the road at times may be completely closed, but that there would be an effort to maximize the time when you at least had one lane open. And we know, seeing other bridges that are done, that very often is accommodated. But I don't have the answers to that. And
Yes.
we will keep you
No, I thank you, and I do want to reiterate that we take no exception with the posture of the folks who have that private access between the two roads. Their position is quite understandable, but I think you folks have acknowledged that the position of I and my neighbors on Homestead is understandable as well.
And work is scheduled to start when?
I don't have the exact date on that.
The current, as of this evening, our own Ledyard home official website says 1 August, but that is a moving target, and indeed North Stonington has a slightly different date. But
Any chance it's moving left? It's not going to get any earlier.
Highly unlikely.
Okay.
Projects always move to the
All
right.
right, well,
Yes.
I only ask because without prejudging the outcome of our last agenda item, which talks about our summer schedule, I'm working right now under the assumption that we're not going to meet until the end of July. As a council, we're going to cancel our first July meeting. And I wanted to make sure we had an opportunity to hear from you again and address the issue, if as necessary, prior to actual start.
You will definitely hear our progress, and we will keep you informed for the meetings,
okay, thank you both.
including the media.
Right, thank you.
Thank you.
Did any other council member want to chime in on the subject? If not, any other members of the public who wish to speak tonight?
Eric, can I go first? You speak?
I'm going to speak as a from the zoning.
Not as a resident? Good evening, Mike Cherry, 5 Whippoorwill Drive. I'm also chair of the Planning Commission and vice chair of the Regional Planning Commission on Economic Development. Spoke to you last time during the public hearing, and I gave you some handouts. I went back over my notes and the tapes and minutes from that, and there were some perceptions or fears that I saw as a result of that public hearing and some of the comments that I saw on paper, and I'd like to address 3 issues out of everything that was said. One had to do with more time being required of the volunteers if we combine the commissions. That same sheet that I gave you last time that showed the 20 different planning organizations within the COG responsibility, I've updated. I provided that at your chairs when we came in tonight, and that shows how often combined commissions meet, how long their meetings are, and the total commitment per month. And what was interesting that I picked up immediately is it appears that separate commissions meet more often, longer, than combined commissions. And I scratched my head and said, how could that be? Well, my experience in the Navy and an electric boat tell me that meetings normally will expand to fill the time allotted. So they've found the secret sauce to get a good agenda and stick to it, and I think that's just doable. But they meet no more often, most or less, and in general for a shorter time. And you could argue, well, they don't have big agendas. Well, I would look at Waterford that just brought in the Cancer Center and the Credit Union and Waterford Commons, and they're busy. They have a combined commission. They meet once a month for a couple hours. I would look at Stonington that's had some significant issues where they brought in a project of 165 units, I believe, in Pawcatuck. In accordance with their regulations, 700 people signed a petition saying, we don't like that. And it was absolutely in accord with every regulation in the town. And by state law, if somebody applies, if the landowner applies and he meets your regulations, your job is to approve his application. They managed to work through that. At the same time, they were rewriting their plan of conservation and development. So I would say that that's a perception and fear, but the facts, the data, don't back that up. The second one was pointed out that you need to be careful on a combined commission if it's planning and zoning, that there's two hats involved. I gave you some data last time from Yukon Clear on the duties and responsibilities of the planning commission and the zoning commission. On the backs of those sheets, it talks about combined commissions. And I will absolutely agree that a planning commission or a zoning commission does wear two hats. One is legislative, and that's when they're writing regulations. The other is administrative, and that's when they're approving applications. And it is very difficult to keep those two hats straight and not try and rewrite your regulations when somebody has a project that you would like, but it's not in accordance with the regulations. That's two hats. The third one was a rush to judgment or a rubber stamp. I'm a volunteer. Everybody on my commission's a volunteer. Everybody on the zoning commission's a volunteer. We have paid professional staff, and if the judgment is, does this application meet our regulations or not, I think our paid professional staff can surely tell us that. And if they can't discern that, they know when to call for legal support or engineering support or any other support they need to provide the right input to our commissions. And I don't see that changing whether it's separate or combined commissions. The only other point I'd like to make is we did hold, Land Use Planning and Public Works did hold a roundtable forum. And Chairman Treaster did represent what Mr. Butler said very well, but I would refer to your packet, page 70, which talks to what the City of Groton Planning and Zoning Commission Chairman, Mr. Rose, said. And he pointed out some strong reasons that he thought a combined commission was better, that maybe didn't get equal time. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other members of the public wishing to speak? Now, Mr. Treaster, you indicated to me that you did wish to speak. You're not on the agenda under Commission of Board Reports, so if you wish to speak, this will be your opportunity.
It's under the commission reports. Sort of. I thought the public hearing was closed, so I'm a little bit surprised that you're accepting more information on the public hearing.
We don't have the same rules that you do.
I'm still learning,
Okay.
Which is painful. 3 or 4 things. One is that our new zoning enforcement official has suggested that the town adopt a uniform policy for the refund of fees. If somebody submits an application that requires a public hearing, they pay $360. They withdraw that application. Should the town return that money? Right now, we do not have a policy. Right now, we keep it. And there's several. That entire policy issue does not exist. And if the council will get that information to me, I will make sure that it is incorporated into our documents and our regulations and our bylaws and our fee structure. Second is that she has also suggested that the town adopt a policy regarding zoning enforcement. We have zoning violations that go back 4 or 5 years that have been ignored. We have new violations that are coming in almost daily. She wants to know. She wants to have a document that informs the public as to how zoning violations are to be prioritized. And right now we do not have any. It's almost embarrassing. It's partially my fault, and I apologize for that. But if the council feels that they would like to contribute information on the enforcement priority formula that the public can understand, I will make that happen. Third is that a little over a month ago, about 6 weeks ago, I submitted, upon request, an electronic copy of the draft new zoning regulations. I call them version 2.2. I have over a man-year of my own time invested in those regulations. LaBerge probably has a couple of man-years invested in it. When I distributed it, I made a request that comments be provided to me. To date, I have not received a single comment from anyone. And I don't know if that means that it is excellent. I don't know if that means that it has not been read. I don't know, but I do want to move forward with these regulations. Our new zoning officer has pointed out deficiencies in our current regulations that are serious.
makes sense to have a series of public hearings to tweak our existing regs when we have a package that already exists, ready to go, that addresses all of these issues. So that's the other issue. Regarding your deliberations later on this evening on the on what I consider to be the dissolution of the zoning commission, obviously I'm opposed to it. During the public hearing, there were 11 people who testified. Only one was for it without conditions. One was for it with on the condition that the transition planning be dramatically improved, and 9 people, including myself, were opposed to it. There's a total of about 15 reasons on the record for why people who opposed the proposed ordinance do so. And I urge that during your deliberations this evening that you look at each one of those 15 reasons and make a decision if it's wrong or if it's not applicable or if you're willing to live with it. In the universe of zoning, which admittedly has different rules, we are required to protect our record, and the Zoning Commission does a superb job of that. We defend it. In fact, by statute, we are required to state the reason for our decisions on the record. Next is that I believe that there are people on the council who did not attend the public hearing. If that was in zoning, they would have to testify on the record that they have listened to the tapes and have studied the documents before they could participate in the deliberations of the vote. I don't know if that's your rules or not, but if it is, I request that the people who are not here recuse themselves from the deliberations because they will not have knowledge of all of the information that was entered into the record. If you are depending upon IQM2, IQM2 has one deficiency, and that is it does not show the highlights. And some of the evidence that was entered in, some of the exhibits that were entered into the record did not show the yellow highlights, which were critical in the presentation. Lastly, however the decision goes, I want the council to know that I will support your decisions wholeheartedly, and I will do everything in my power to make it as successful as possible. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let me take the opportunity to address a few points. Just to summarize, other than the final point you made, Chairman Treaster, about supporting whatever decision, I think you made 5 points. First one was about fees. Second one was about zoning violation prioritization. Third one was about draft zoning regulations. Fourth was about, you just talked about the number of people who testified. And the fifth was about people who missed the public hearing. I want to address first numbers 2 and 3, zoning violation prioritization and the draft zoning regulations. And by statute, the council is actually not to participate directly in either one of those things. Zoning enforcement is left exclusively to the zoning commission.
We understand that, but we also are receptive to comments from everyone.
Okay, so I mean, if you're interested in our comments, that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
But
and that's exactly.
I just wanted to
understand that.
Put on the record.
Sure, we understand.
By statute, how the zoning gets enforced, in fact, whether or not we even have a zoning enforcement officer. If the zoning commission were to decide that they themselves, as a commission, wanted to enforce the zoning regulations and not have a paid employee, there's nothing we can do about that.
On the fee structure of the council, the ordinance says that you approve the fee structure.
That was item 1. Okay? That was not what I was addressing, because I agree with you there. The third one had to do with the draft zoning regulations. And again, that is completely the prerogative of the zoning commission. There could be others. I understand you welcome our input.
Yes.
There could be others who would accuse us of going where we're not supposed to go. I'm simply pointing out that it's a double-edged sword. On the last item you talked about people who missed the public hearing, I just did want to tell, for the record, the public, that we do operate in terms of adopting ordinance where that is completely separate from the detailed statutory procedures involved in adopting a zoning ordinance. Zoning directly infringes upon people's individual property rights. Any zoning rule that says you can't do this, that is an infringement on what would otherwise be a unilateral right of you as a property owner to do whatever you wanted on your property. As a result, there are very detailed statutory requirements on adopting any zoning ordinance and public hearings, who on the zoning commission may vote on any particular issue before the zoning commission if you did not attend the public hearing, etc. Those rules do not apply to the rules we have tonight for the adoption of a regular municipal ordinance. A regular municipal ordinance is no different than any other piece of municipal legislation that the legislators, in this case that is us, we are left to our devices unless otherwise put in statute. We're left to determine for ourselves if we believe we have sufficiently informed ourselves, whether that was through the public hearing or through reading of the minutes or whatever other ways we have. And each counselor is expected to make their own decision. If they do not believe that they're sufficiently informed, then it would be appropriate for them to abstain. Otherwise, they're free to vote on the matter as they feel fit. Okay, so I just wanted to address those points because you brought them up. Do any other counselors care to address those points? Or any
I'll be happy to answer any questions if you have on the information.
I was going to look at your regulation there.
I just read it. And also, it's not a 5-hour project. It's supposed to work to a 30.
And I remember I did help.
Okay. Anyone else?
Thank you.
All right. If not, we will move. The next item on the agenda is committee, commissions, and boards reports. We have on the agenda a report from Mimi Becker-Llewellyn to the committee to investigate town manager form of government. She is not here tonight. This was placed on the agenda with the anticipation that that committee would actually provide to us their formal report with sufficient time for us to review it. I understand the report is done, yet we still don't actually have it. So as a result, we're going to postpone this to our next meeting with the expectation that we will have the report and have the opportunity to review it, and when there is a presentation, we'll be able to ask informed questions. All right, next item on the agenda is comments of town councilors. Anybody wishing to make a comment? Yes, Councilman Bradley.
As you know, the senior citizen director resigned and a new person has been appointed, and she's at the commission meeting today. I think it's going to work out very well. She starts on Tuesday. Also, they're keeping records of the number of people who come to the center, and it is increasing every year. And in fact, for this year so far, 4,612 people have crossed the threshold of the Ledyard Senior Center. So people are taking advantage of it.
It's good.
Not different people.
No. That's business, right?
I would like to see how many, in addition to that, which I think is great that it's going up, I would like to see how many people that represents.
You mean, is it the same people coming
It
3
could be
times
like
a week?
20 people.
Is it 100 people coming 40 times a year, or is it 400 people
I
coming
will
10
find
times a
that
year?
information. Sure, I'll find out, yeah.
Yes, Councilor Summers.
I had the pleasure of attending Ledyard High School class graduation, the class of 2012 graduation with Councilor Davis and the mayor. It was a beautiful evening, and we had the required storm clouds that passed overhead quickly. I thought the speeches by the students were fantastic. I thought Principal Luca Bordi in his last year at Ledyard High School made a superb speech. I hope we all take that opportunity to read it. It's on patch. You have to dig for it, but it's good. It's good advice for all of us. And I want to thank Mr. Bordi for his 4 years of service as Ledyard High School principal and all of his years since his graduation from the school in 1972. I don't think we're losing an asset because I hope we'll see him in another capacity, but we are losing a really great principal. Thank you.
Other comments of town councilors? Okay, wish to make a comment in the past. I have informed the public that I was personally nominated to a position in Washington, D.C. It was an appointment that requires Senate confirmation, and confirmed by the Senate, I will be required to resign from this position, regretfully. I have heard from some of the Senate committee staff who are tasked with handling the nomination process, and they have told me that their best information is they anticipate action before the United States Senate would take its August recess, which would be on the first Friday of August, which I believe is the 3rd. So if that actually happens, and then presuming, without assuming, that they would actually confirm me, then at that time I would have to resign the position that I'm in now, serving the town of Ledyard, regretfully. Okay, so with that, let's move to minutes approval. We have before us the regular meeting minutes of June 13th, 2012, as well as the public hearing minutes of June 13th, dealing with the Gales Ferry Fire District furnace conversion. Public hearing minutes of June 13th, dealing with the Gales Ferry facility, school facility leases, and the public hearing minutes of June 13th, dealing with the proposed ordinance to combine the Planning and Zoning Commission. Do I have a motion?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion on any of these minutes? Okay, Roxanne, please call the roll.
Mrs. McGrath?
Abstain.
Mr. Soms?
Yes.
Mr. Sullivan?
Yes.
Mrs. Wadecki?
Abstain.
Mrs. Davis?
Yes.
Mr. Dombrowski?
Abstain.
Mr. Eichelberg?
Yes.
Mr. France?
Yes.
5 in favor. 10 abstaining?
No.
John Marshall not here.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
So
so
5 in
items-
favor, 3 opposed.
3 abstentions and 1 absence.
And 1 absent.
Okay, which still constitutes passing? Yes?
No.
Okay, we don't often have votes where it isn't very clear. The motion passes. All right. We have a communications list. Are there any comments, questions, or additions to the communications list as provided? All right, seeing none. Next item is council subcommittee and liaison reports of administration. Councilor Eichelberg.
The administration committee met earlier this evening. On our agenda were the Town of Ledyard blight ordinance, which we discussed and our plan to move forward with that. We also talked about the motion to propose the regulation on motor vehicle collection fees, some appointments, and a few other motions that will also show up in our agenda tonight. And we looked at a couple of different things, such as the floating position, which we took no action on, but did discuss. So that was our agenda tonight.
Okay, are there any questions for administration? All right, thank you. Community services, Councilor Marshall is not here. Do we have someone from community services who can address?
Community services is not done.
Okay, they have not met. Finance Committee, Chairman France.
Finance Committee met last Wednesday, and during that meeting, in addition to the items for the council later this evening, the Administrative Emergency Services Russell Shaw made a presentation on the plan to purchase a new 1,500 pumper truck for the fire department. The plan will be to take about 9 months for that pumper to be built in the time that it's contracted. And we heard that presentation. The other thing that we did was forward a letter concerning proposed amendment to ordinance 114, which deals with ordinance amending authorizing the town of Ledyard to make appropriation for the first of an ambulance service. We forwarded that letter to both the LDs and the Administrative Emergency Services for comment, with a return date requested of 11 July, which is our next meeting.
Any questions for finance? All right, information technology.
We have not met. We will be meeting on July 3rd, and I'm going to count noses to see My committee will be in town on July 3rd, but that'll be our next meeting.
Best planning. Okay. Next, land use planning, public works committee.
Land use also has not met since our last meeting. We're also planning a meeting.
This sense a trend. All right, Board of Education liaison.
Only I was going to report on the graduation, but Councilor Solms did a really great job of that. I will say it was except for the backflip, was the calmest graduation I have ever attended.
No silly string.
Only at the end.
There wasn't any.
None. But it was at the end, yeah. There weren't any beach balls till the end. There weren't enough bubbles. There definitely were not enough bubbles. But it was a very nice event, and
Is this a good trend or a bad trend?
well, I like the bubbles personally. But
Next class of 2013.
Bubbles are good.
Bubble blast.
All right.
Hi, John.
Anything else? Any questions for Board of Education liaison? All right. Next is WPCA, Councilor Solms.
WPCA did meet. Construction bids for Elgin Heights were open on June 14th, and they came in significantly below the engineer's estimate, which is good news for Ledyard. The building committee authorized the award to Halleck Water Contracting, and the town submitted the request for authorization to award to the Connecticut Department of Public Health. So that means it's not a done deal, but we hope to start construction if we get a quick turnaround by September 1st of this year, with completion by August 2013, next year. In the WPCA meeting, and with the support of last night, with the support of the mayor, is continuing to look into WPCA revenue and expenses. Total outstanding accounts receivable has now dropped to $46,000, down from $100,000 a few months ago, and down from $160,000 more than a year ago. The WPCA is working to obtain better financial information regarding revenue and expenses, as well as water purchased. And last night, they reviewed data provided by Groton Utilities showing water usage on the Route 117 system during the past 2 years, and the mayor is working to gather additional data. WPCA Finance Committee will now take the lead on this, working with the mayor and the staff to accomplish this goal. The WPCA also continued its work to develop a complete set of policies, agreeing to work on 1 to 2 policies a month, and they have about 11 to 12 policies that they want to put in place. They also reviewed and approved with conditions the new water main extension agreement between the town and Green Falls Associates for project for Cedar Ridge and Hope Ridge Drive in Gales Ferry. And I wanted the residents to know that the WPCA now meets on the 4th Tuesday of the month at 7 p.m. in this building, Town Hall Annex, and that's the last time I'll remind everybody of that. Thank you.
A question. During the last, what I believe was the last meeting that I was actually a WPCA member, there was a proposal to raise the rates by a relatively significant amount. We didn't do that, and then we had the new committee. So I guess the question for you is, where does all that stand?
The question actually came up last night, and the comment was made by the WPCA that without hard data, it's very difficult to prove exactly what we need for a rate increase. So the plan is to assemble the data on water sold, water purchased, revenue, and expenses before discussing a rate increase. I don't know if that's doable, but that's where the discussion went. So there is no further discussion other than that on a rate increase.
There's no indication that we're having any difficulty paying our bills?
We're not out of money, but there is indication that our expenses are running ahead of our revenues. That the indication is the reports that we get, and yet we don't run out of money, which has been going on for more than a couple of years, which is odd, and that's why the WPCA continues to want to look at this. So it could be that we do need to resolve, if there's a true shortfall, which I suspect there is, we probably need to resolve that with a rate increase.
Okay, well, as a WPCA rate payer, I am not anxious to see an increase, but I'm also not anxious to see a default. So I would encourage that that the WPCA come to some resolution as quickly as possible. And I know that having tried personally for 2.5 years to get better data and failed talented than I was, but still. All I'm trying to say is, don't polish the cannonball before making a decision. Make a decision. Okay. So, anybody else have any questions or comments for WPCA? I had a sort of a related but more related information technology comment on WPCA. For those of you who are on the IMQ2 website and go to WPCA Liaison Report, you'll find that Councilor Solms has actually provided a few paragraphs here that the public could read. They could have read before tonight's meeting and perhaps asked a question. And it's the only liaison report where that's happened. I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. What I'm trying to do is encourage the others who could make reports to try and do that. We are trying to move so that through the web, from the convenience of their home, the public can, in fact, actively participate in the council business. That includes asking questions of the council. And the more information they have, the better they could do it. Informative reports were made here by, for example, admin and finance, who actually had some things to report tonight. Nevertheless, I think it would have been very difficult for anybody at home to have asked a question based on those reports, really, because they don't have the information. We've moved on by the time they get the information. If the information is presented in the same manner as Councilor Solms has provided it, then that would public would have the opportunity to ask a question on it.
I think in the past, land use has done this too, but land use has been at sea.
Well, Hawaii.
Hawaii.
No, that doesn't count.
Hawaii's in the city.
We didn't meet, so.
Okay, I've made my point. Okay, no other questions or comments from about land use? Any other liaison reports? Yes, Councilor Frank.
The Historic District Commission met on the 18th. A couple of things of interest. One is they've been participating in the house restoration project in Ipswich, Mass, and providing pine boards that they actually use the up-down sawmill to take down broken logs. They experienced a good experience for the volunteers, and that it also has tested their knowledge of how the up-down sawmill as a follow-on to that, there happens to be a neighbor of the sawmill that has pine trees that are coming down, and they're going to accept those pine trees, and Steve Maslin will be assisting in bringing them over to the up-down sawmill. For the Lester House, they finished their environmental assessment, zero draft did one. They recommended some additional insulation, which they're going to take advantage of, and then they're re-roofing a shed as part of their normal budget.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Councilor Franks on the Historic District Commission? Okay, seeing none and no other liaison reports, we turn to the mayor.
Okay, thank you. I think I'd like to pick up on where we left off on WPCA. And we had a very good discussion last night, and I appreciate the fact that we have not been successful in getting some what I consider to be basic information. And I certainly don't take anything away from the previous WPCA, but I think they're fundamental questions. And the one thing maybe is that I can be annoyingly persistent in trying to get data. And until we know the answer to that very simple question, which is how much water do we buy and how much water do we bill? And until I know personally, until I get the answer to that question, I'm going to be very hesitant to take any other action. So I've started my end of it. I know Mr. Diaz is working his end of it, and we'll see what type of answers we get. I need some help from the council or from staff. We have an upcoming millstone drill and hurricane drill, and some hurricane drills. The millstone drill is mandatory. The hurricane drills are optional. However, we do plan to participate in those. The millstone drill, the actual drill is the 17th of July, and the assessment is in August. I believe it's August 25th. I will be out of town both of those days, and so I need a stand-in I certainly would appreciate anyone from the council to do that. What we need to do to authorize that person and make them official, I will look into that. We met with officials from CLMP, Northeast Utilities. There's a project that they have, as many of you will see on July 7th, and that's another item I'll talk about. There are transmission wires that come across the river, come across Route 12, in through Gales Ferry, and then down into Groton. They want to increase the current that goes through those and the power that's transmitted through those. However, when you do that, they heat up the cables sag, and there's some headway problems. And so they need to raise some of these towers. So there's six towers they need to raise. Amazingly, the way they do it, there shouldn't be any outages, and they can do these towers, each tower within literally hours. So we'll let you know when that happens. For no other reason, it might be interesting to watch. And Route 12 resurfacing, we keep trying to nail down a date on that. It looks like it's not going to be before probably the second week of July, but Mike Washington and I have been talking, and he will give us a date when that happens. He has already initiated conversations with the sub-base to route all the traffic past Sean Sullivan's house to take some strain off there. The police facility, I appreciate town council action this evening. Already authorizing the municipal building committee. I did learn something there. I went to the building committee expecting them to be all overjoyed that they had another project, and they informed me, and rightly so, that the projects need to be assigned to them. So I made a wrong assumption that this would just happen to go to them. So I appreciate the council. The chairman has authorized them to take that on. We did receive 4 proposals from architects, and tonight I've asked the council to appoint at least one temporary member who would represent that project. Dispatch, we're in the, shortly, probably tomorrow morning, I will be distributing the revised and updated attribute and specifications to the 6 potential providers and requesting a late August request for return of the request for qualification for those that are interested. As we said, we hired a new senior director. She starts July 2nd and has already spent some time with us. I'm very pleased with that choice, and I do wish to express my best wishes for Carol Geiler after her 3 years of service. Munis training, the financial program that we've invested a significant amount of money and time over the past year. These past 2 days, we've had all of our appropriate general government and Board of Ed staff attending all-day training over at the Board of Ed and over at the high school library. It's going to be a challenge, but I think it's like every other program, that the more you use it, the more it will become part of our routine. IQM2, thank you for mentioning that. With your indulgences, I have recruited Roxanne and myself to take on the goal by January 1st to have all of our commissions and boards and agencies on that system. We had one last night where it was introduced to them, and they got all excited about it. They want to do, what do they want to do? Webinars. They want to do webinars for this. So, one at a time, we're picking off these commissions. Training webinars. So we're going to be working on that. Next week is 4th of July holiday. It's a strange one. Holiday's in the middle of the week. Therefore, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, trash collection is moved off one day. There's already something on the website. We'll get it out on the other media. I am meeting tomorrow with the Ledyard Fair Committee to review the lease and policies. Any input, comments that you have, I would certainly appreciate your input. I know the question you're going to ask, which is, well, what does it look like? I will try to get that to you, scan it and get that to you electronically so that you can look at it. It's one of those that hasn't been looked at.
It's been looked at, it just hasn't been updated.
It hasn't been updated in a long time. Now, I hesitate to, go to the town attorney for a complete rewrite, but I certainly will defer to you if you have an interest in that. But we will be having some discussions about that. Okay, and finally, day we've been waiting for, Saturday, July 7th, a week from Saturday, from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m., Styron has graciously, and Gales Ferry Methodist Church and Boy Scout Troop 12, and I know there's somebody else now that I'm forgetting, but graciously will be giving us access to Mount Decatur in Gales Ferry. We will be meeting at the church parking lot. That is the access. At 10 o'clock, there will be historians and
The mayor?
scouts. What?
And the mayor?
Oh, absolutely. And individuals that will be guiding us through that area. There will be people stationed up in that area. Styron has really gone out of their way in terms of cleaning up the site. I mean, it's as if, it's been used for years consistently. So we're going to be getting a lot of publicity out on that. I appreciate the press helping us with that and getting it out on the website. So we really want to play that up. I'd like to see as many people as possible. It is an incredible view of the river, and it also is an important part of history to just get an appreciation for the way wars were fought. The wars were fought in those days, especially for this area being a naval area and right on the heels of Oxale, to see the types of things that were done in those days in terms of naval engagements and naval strategy. So again, Saturday, July 7th.
That is Oxale is taking place
It
at the
is.
same
It's
time.
right there. It's the same day. So in the morning you can do Oxale. In the afternoon, no, in the morning you can do Mount Decatur. Afternoon Oxale. Evening fireworks. So it's going to be a great weekend. Our emergency services are cooperating with us. Styron has really looked at all of the points here. We've got emergency services standing by, police. So the only qualification is you will 10 to 1.
Saturday, the 7th,
Saturday,
at
10 a.m.
And
to
where
1
does
p.m.
the public go? Where do they show up? At Styron Gate?
Gales Ferry Methodist Church parking lot off Chapman Lane in Gales Ferry.
Thank you.
Everyone will be required to sign a slip on the way there. It is private property, but again, we're very grateful to Styron. Styron people haven't just made access. They've really gotten into this in terms of looking at the history and putting together a program. So again, I would encourage the public, when you see people, encourage them to do that. It may be your last opportunity for another year. So please take advantage of it. And I believe that is my report.
Okay, questions for the mayor?
Just one question. I know you said it was from 10 to 1 on July 7th. That out there again. Can someone show up at 12 o'clock? Will they still
Oh,
be-
yes.
Okay.
This is a continuous. It's not a plan.
Just want to make sure.
Anytime between 10 and 1 o'clock. Show up. Yes.
Other questions for the mayor? Okay, couple of points. Let me see. First of all, you mentioned the municipal building committee and a temporary member. And just for clarification, shortly we'll get to revising the agenda, but the agenda that was posted 24 hours in advance had on it an item about the municipal building committee and this. But I intend to change that agenda item when we get to new business in order to appoint the temporary member. And also on the same subject, for clarification, the municipal building committee, when the mayor first went to them, said, since our last meeting, he said, okay, let's move forward on getting an architect to determine the best possible location for a new police station. The municipal building committee responded with, well, we don't know that we have formally been tasked to do that by the council. Okay, I, as the council chair, acting what I fully believe was the authority that this council gave me at the last meeting, then wrote a letter saying, yes, the council did ask you to do this. So that issue, in my view, has been resolved, unless the majority of the council feels that they didn't actually give us that authority, but I believe they did. So for all of that clarification, that was the issue that the mayor was talking about where he said the chair gave them permission. No, actually, the chair wrote a letter saying that the full council had already given permission. And in lieu of having the full council actually take an agenda item tonight, we're going to instead talk about having a temporary member. On the Route 12 repaving, now when we had the storms last fall, one of the fallouts of that was maybe some better signage, some better communication methods. Do we have anything in place that we could maybe put up a couple days before Route 12, or is the state going to do that? How's the public going to know, other than the throngs that tune into our meetings here? How's the public going to know that in fact this is about to happen?
That's an excellent question. What we've started to do is put some signs on roads we're going to do a few days in advance. Certainly, you'll start to see signs. They put typical construction signs and things up, and there's always preliminary work that's done. Although they're not going to be doing any drainage work, there's usually some warning. I don't know what good that does somebody. If I do a week in advance or 2 weeks in advance, or a day in advance, what you could really do. But I will, in my conversations, we've got a good relationship with them. I will check into that.
If you put up those flip signs like a few days ahead and say road construction,
and as
this day to this day.
As a state road, I would think that was the road. Nevertheless, if we as a town, I know we had talked about as a town trying to procure some of those signs, so that in the event of like another type storm as we had last fall, maybe we could have some signs in a few places as a municipal government telling people where to go or what to do. If we owned those signs, and I don't think we actually could purchase any, but if we did, this would have been an opportunity for us, in addition to what the state does, to go out and put up whatever notification we wanted.
That's a good point. I'll talk to you, Mike, about that. And some of those lit signs that, starting.
They usually say starting, and whether it's going to be daytime or nighttime, and how long to expect the delays to last. And it says they list 2 dates, and then it goes way past that second day.
Okay. You asked for the council to have somebody stand in. I just wanted to inform the council that I'm scheduled to be out of town on the 17th, so that July, so that would not be me. But I'm not available to stand in for the mayor during a millstone drill. So if there's anybody else who could do that, please let us know.
I nominate Linda. That's her thing. She wants to be prepared.
I will discuss it with you.
I hear they do have Wi-Fi down in the EOC, where you'll be locked up.
Say, Linda, your mistake is not nominating Sharon.
Doesn't, when the mayor's out, doesn't the town council chair?
Yeah, so.
And when the town council chair is, doesn't
Yes,
the pro
Chairman
tem?
Pro Tem. Who's not you, because you were at last.
That's why I'm bringing it up.
About to be my president.
Okay, so everything next time the
We
week.
can just play the lottery, folks. Number comes
We
up.
already did. Nomination in a second.
Okay, on the Ledyard Fair, as uncontroversial as any lease might be, I think we might still have the same issue as we had with Gales Ferry School. This is publicly and it's a lease. It's supposed to by statute have a public hearing. Okay, I don't believe we've ever had a public hearing.
It is my intention to bring that research to council for a public hearing. Absolutely.
Mention
Correct.
it.
We never have.
Yeah. All right.
And there is an exception for a renewed lease. So if we did it once. What?
Well, we need to look at.
So we're going
simply.
to have to do it next year, but
Yeah,
certainly.
I mean, if we do this correctly, we might not have a Ledyard Fair this year simply because we are only now realizing the administrative steps required. But let's not take it to the extreme.
I'm sure it could turn out for the next council meeting.
Let's at least make an attempt to comply with various requirements. Last, I just want to ask you about the Volpe property. I believe at our last meeting, the status as reported was, well, we don't have an appraisal yet, but we should have it soon. Do we have anything?
We have the environmental appraisal, which is fine. We have the survey. We are having difficulty getting the appraisal. And I spoke with Charlie Carno today. He has been attempting to contact the appraiser. That is the last piece of the puzzle.
So the appraiser just simply hasn't given
He
us.
just has not given it to us.
Are there any other comments from the mayor? Questions? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And while I try to get my screensaver off. We move to old business. There is an item that was previously tabled on an easement dealing with some Holmberg property and land use. Are you moving to take that off the table?
Land use is not looked at this year. We're putting it on the agenda for the third.
Okay. Just as a reminder, there was a proposed lease. The lease came to us from planning, but had not gone through land use, so it was tabled to go through land use, and it still has not gone through land use. So the first and second items on the agenda we will move right past. All right. The second is, I'm sorry, the third item on the agenda. I call on admin. We move to. Is there a motion to take off the table the ordinance to combine the Planning and Zoning Commission?
So moved.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to remove from the table the ordinance combining the Planning and Zoning Commission of the Town of Ledyard with the zoning, combining the Planning and Zoning Commission of the Town of Ledyard. Roxanne, would you please call the roll?
Yes. Mr. Soms?
Yes.
Mr. Sullivan?
Yes.
Mrs. Wadecki?
Yes.
Mrs. Davis?
Yes.
Mr. Dombrowski?
Yes.
Mr. Eichelberg?
Yes.
Mr. France?
Yes.
Mrs. McGrattan?
Yes.
8 in favor, 0 opposed.
Okay, the motion is off the table. So now I ask for the actual motion on the proposed ordinance.
I'll make a motion to adopt a proposed an ordinance combining the Planning Commission of the Town of Ledyard with the Zoning Commission of the Town of Ledyard as contained in the draft dated April 8, 2012.
Okay, well, I will second. We have a motion and a second. Discussion. I want to emphasize we had a public hearing, as pointed out by Chairman Treaster, the chairman of the current zoning commission. 11 people spoke, one in favor with some reservations, and 9 against. So I'd like to hear from the two committees that have considered this ordinance, the two committee chairs that have considered this ordinance and moved it forward to the full council, what reasons were considered in favor of this ordinance and why it got past the committee with what I assume is a favorable endorsement. So I'll turn to land use first.
Land use looked at this ordinance and been drafted based upon several other ordinances in other towns, plus one that had previously come before the council. In land use opinion, we thought that this would be to streamline the land use process for all applicants, not just commercial development, but also for residential use, so that there would be one point of contact that person would give with the land use director, instead of having to go between all the different agencies within the town. So it would streamline that process, and everyone had one board of commissions that would have to go for planning and zoning purposes. So that was the whole impetus of putting it behind us. There was no political forethought or anything like that. Nobody's trying to get rid of anybody, as was mentioned in the public hearings. And at the last meeting, which, by the way, Mr. Treaster, I did watch the public hearing, and I did read all of the material, just to satisfy your curiosity. You didn't think I wouldn't. But the whole impetus behind this, and also as Mr. Terry has also pointed out, is that there are very few municipalities that have separate planning and zoning commissions, and they all seem to be working perfectly fine. They're not just sitting there rubber stamping something that staff tells them to. The other point about this has been pushed by most of the professional staff that we have talked to, including our planning director, is that just for the town to support the two commissions, it doesn't have the proper staffing to do that. Even with hiring the current zoning enforcement officer. And this way, only one person, one staff member would have to be present at the combined meetings, and I would be the director of planning. joint commission would have sufficient staff support as needed, and to get to the proper input as required by statute. Just listening to some of the arguments that a lot of people have made, and I looked through, a lot of people always talk about and I can remember this even when I was on the zoning commission and when I also chaired the zoning commission myself, is the checks and balances between the planning commission and the zoning commission. And while I agree and kind of half-heartedly see that, but the issue is really the enabling statute for both the planning commission and the zoning commission doesn't support. The planning commission is not a check and balance to the zoning commission, and the zoning commission is not a check and balance to the planning commission. The checks and balances are through the zoning board of appeals and the state courts for appeal process, not the planning and zoning commissions as checks and balances to each other. The only thing that has, if an application does come forward to the zoning commission and if it does not comply with the plan of conservation and development, and the planning commission denies that application, the zoning commission can only approve it with the supermajority. That is really the only statute enabling this checks and balance between the two commissions. That's it.
Okay, thank you. Evan?
Okay, I'm going to echo some of what the chair of land use has said. My comments first with regard to many of the objections that were given at the public hearing at our last meeting. I want to make it very clear that in any conversation I've been involved with, and I think I've been involved with most of them regarding this issue, this has never been a referendum on either the zoning commission or the chair of the zoning commission. This has never been an issue about politics. So I want to clear that up right away. What this is, as the chair of land use said, is an attempt to streamline the process for applicants, for developers in the town of Ledyard. Now, you may not agree with this step, but that's entirely different than saying that this is a political move or an indictment of anyone in zoning. We've been looking at this for many years. When I was chairing economic development, we talked about this time and time again with experts that we brought in who advised us on the best way to help developers in the town. Every single one of them told us over and over again, streamline your process, make it easier for developers so that they don't have to make multiple appointments to talk to multiple people time and time and time again. Every single one of them told us to streamline the process, and that's exactly what this is. I believe that this ordinance is a good attempt at doing that, and so that is why admin moved it forward.
Okay, thank you. First,
one more note. I will say that it is imperative at this point that we do fill the position that the mayor has put forward, the floating administrative assistant. That's going to be a very useful position in staff support for whatever commission or committee moving forward.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to go on record next as indicating that I fully intend to support passage of the ordinance that's before us tonight. I recognize that we had a public hearing and that the majority of people who spoke against the proposed ordinance. Nevertheless, most, although not all of those people who spoke were directly connected to the status quo, and my experience tells me that people who are connected to the status quo will more passionately oppose a specific proposal than people who are not connected and who don't closely follow the details. My other experience goes back to a meeting that the Board of Education and Finance Committee had. I believe it was back in March. And it was held at the high school. And at that public hearing, specific cuts were proposed to the school board's budget, cuts that fortunately did not come to pass. Nevertheless, there was a significant turnout of parents who spoke passionately about their support of the schools And they spoke passionately, many of those parents, about the need to try and do something to increase the commercial development within the town and attempt to get more tax revenue from non-homeowners so that we could take the burden off the homeowners and still support the education of our children. And so for all those people who passionately supported that thought process, you have to ask the question, well, okay, so what are we doing? And we are doing some things, but when you look at a town like Waterford or Stonington, which does have a combined planning and zoning commission, and they both do have tax rates significantly lower than ours, and who both have good school systems. And you have to ask, well, is this necessarily a bad thing? It's not necessarily the magic potion. I admit to that. And those towns have other advantages that we don't have. So it's not as though doing this is going to make us into a Waterford or a Stonington with lots of commercial development. Nevertheless, when those parents stand up and say that, and here we are, we're in a system that is only practiced by a handful of towns in the area. We have the highest tax rate in the area, and we've had this system for decades. And you have to ask the question, well, maybe we ought to try this. It's not irreversible. So when it's been pointed out to us that there's no proof that this is going to improve commercial development, well, you're absolutely right. There is no proof. On the other hand, when you look these parents in the eye and they say, what are you doing to try and get more? I find it very hard to justify not taking this step. I think this step is necessary, if for no other reason, we can look those parents back in the eye and say, well, we tried. I'd like to hear from other councilors. Yes, Councilor Grant.
25 years ago, Bill Haas came to work for the town. I was the mayor at the time, and I appointed him as the planner. Over the few months before he died, I visited with him every week, and naturally what we talked about. And we reminisced about his days here and some of the problems that he ran up against as the planner, dealing with individuals and dealing with issues. He then went on to tell me how things worked in Stonington and how much smoother it was than it was here. And for that reason, I am going to support. And then for other reasons too, but that's the main reason I'm going to support the merger of the two commissions.
Thank you, Councilor Davis.
I had a whole bunch of things, but you've covered them all so nicely, so I'm only going to go with what was my final point. And that was, at the public hearing, the comment for me that was the aha moment was this one. Currently, the Zoning Commission utilizes the town staff for very little of its needs, as we as volunteers do most of the work that support staff would normally do. And while I really hope that no one takes offense at this, because I really, really do appreciate you volunteers, we don't want volunteers doing staff work. It's a liability and it's a danger. But that comment did get me to understand why people were concerned about having to do more work. Because obviously if you're not relying on staff and then suddenly you take the planning job, the zoning job, now you do have twice as much work if you're not relying on staff. So what I did is I took a look at Waterford as an example, because I thought that's a good one to look at because they have all sorts of stuff going on. And I actually read through all 12 of their minutes, meeting minutes of this year. They've met 12 times since January 1st. Most of their meetings were between an hour, maybe an hour to an hour and a half. There were one or two that went a long time. But the big difference between us and them is that they clearly relied on their staff, so that when they got to the meeting, most of the work was done, and then they just had to vote on what the applications were. And so that was my aha moment. So for me, the public hearing it definitely reinforced my belief, but it also gave me an understanding of why those speaking against it spoke against it.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other councilors wishing to speak? Councilor France?
Pitching back on the public hearing and the impassioned outcry, if you will, from the members of the zoning commission and their impassioned pleas essentially for, as Chairman Sullivan said, the status quo, and that we've always done it this way. My background is engineering, and in engineering, we look for something called objective quality evidence. Essentially, that is something factual, objective, not emotion, not opinion. Almost without fault, there was no evidence brought forward. There were about a number of opinions, very strongly felt, very impassioned. But there was no factual data stating that having separate commissions was a benefit. There was no factual evidence stating that combining them was a flaw. The best that can be come up with is that it doesn't matter which way you go. So I find it hard to believe that, and hard to support the status quo without any evidence to the contrary. You would expect that if we've been doing something for almost 40 years, we would have evidence that that process was the way to enact and manage planning and zoning in the town. But we don't. So for that reason, there's no reason to remain the same. Because you would expect after 40 years, you would have the evidence to validate that remaining the same is the right way.
Thank you. Councilor Summers?
I've spent most of my life paying attention to zoning. And the reason I have paid attention is because zoning is one of the most important regulations we have in this town or any town or city. And it's important because it protects the value of most people's largest single investment, their home. And in connection with that, it also protects the quality of life. So this is important stuff. To Chairman Sullivan's point that a property owner has a right to do with their property what they wish, I absolutely agree with him. But the reason we have zoning is so that when a property owner does what he wants or she wants with their property, that they don't impact, or at least we have some controls and regulations on how they impact the neighbors. So I take this seriously. I've sat on land use for, I think, 5 years now, about. And land use had the votes to bring this forward years ago. And because there are 3, and I was the one who was the holdout, and I was opposed to this. And I voted to bring it forward for exactly the same reason that Councilor McGrath gave. Mary called me after she met with Mr. Haas, and I had emailed him after one of the joint meetings, well, actually it was a land use planning meeting, but we had the zoners and planners from other towns. And I invited him to our next meeting. And unfortunately, because of his illness, he couldn't come. So Mary suggested that I give him a call, and I did. And he, on the record of our public hearings, he's quoted as saying you can do it either way you want. What he said to me is you can do it either way you want, but and I won't repeat everything Councilor McGrath said, but basically he said Ledyard has suffered in his experience when he was planner from silo organizations. Planning and zoning have historically been silos. Now, that's the reason I moved to bring it forward, and that's the reason I'm going to vote for this tonight. But I have several really strong concerns, and I'm really wrestling with this because, as I say, I take it seriously. I'm listening to the council members who have sat on and been on EDC planning, land use planning. You've attended many of these meetings. I've attended several, quite a few, but nowhere near as many as you. So I'm listening to my fellow councilors. And that's why I'm going to vote yes. I'm going to take Mr. Haas's advice. He is a planner, and he was one of the best, if not the best, this state has had. There are several pros, which I'll list first. One is we use the words in this ordinance. The goal is to enhance development. I think that's a very weak term. It doesn't really mean anything. I like Councilor Dabrowski's word. The real goal in my mind is to streamline the application process for the right development. And I can't really say it. It's to streamline the process for all developers. But what we want for Ledyard is smart development, meaning the right commercial development in the right places. We want the right smart housing growth in the right places. We can't let housing run rampant. That's the problem we have now. We don't have enough commercial development. On the other hand, this is a residential community. We don't want to build, and we'll never see, I don't think, big box stores in this town. But my concern is, and I think a lot of the people who spoke at the hearings, their concern is by changing what we do and have done historically, we run the risk of losing all control over development. My hope is that that will not happen. I'm supporting this also because I think it gives planning and zoning more authority. I've always been concerned that planning, for as much work as they do and as much as they review, planning really only has limited authority in some areas. The plan of conservation and development, as I've been led to understand, is really something you can run over if you want to. If planning has zoning authority as well, I believe it strengthens the town's regulatory ability. And of course, I want to remove the silo effect that Mr. Haas referred to. I want to second Councilor Davis's comment that commissions have to rely on staff. And I also want to thank the zoning members, and in particular Mr. Treaster, because this town has had several bad years with zoning. We've lost a zoning officer. Mr. Treaster has had to serve as the zoning officer. We've had to have our building officer, official serve as the zoning officer. So zoning has done a lot for this town in stepping in and filling the gap. And to Councilor Francis, to your point that we don't know if it's worked, I challenge you to look at this town. I think it has worked. I think what we have been doing has been working. However, we don't have, in terms of the appearance and the quality of life and all that, however, we don't have enough of the right commercial development that we've been looking for the last 4 years. Here are my concerns. Loss of volunteers, and I've been saying this for a long time, and I agree with Mr. Treaster, who's been making this point for 3 years. I'm deeply concerned about the loss of expertise. If we don't have some of the zoning members who continue in their role and step onto planning where there are openings, then we will lose some deep experience from our zoning commission. I'm concerned about the timeline for implementation. I'll come back to that last. I'm concerned that the zoning has been hearing applications in process. There's certain rules about that. If you have heard, as we talked about earlier tonight, if you are on the zoning commission and you've heard an application, or if you have not heard an application, you can't vote on it. So my point is, zoning is in the process of hearing applications. We have to figure out how we get those applications through, because planning can't hear them unless they do a lot of really hard work to catch up. You can't combine planning and zoning. What we're really doing is having planning take on the role and the obligations and responsibilities of zoning. So we're not disbanding both committees. We can't do that. We are having the existing planning commission take on the role of zoning, and there are some openings on planning. To do all of this is my final comment and my concern and my recommendation. To make all of this work, we have to extend the timeline in the current ordinance to give ourselves the time to, number one, move people onto planning who have zoning expertise if they're willing. And we also have to address this issue of applications and process. So my suggestion is that we consider a friendly amendment to the ordinance to extend the timeline for implementation.
Okay, I will promise to come back to that specifically. But before we do, we have one counselor who's not spoken, so I just want to
you mean I can speak?
Yes.
I wasn't at the meeting, the public hearing or the meeting. I have read the minutes, I've read all of the letters. I'm very conflicted on this because I've never been involved in zoning, I've never been involved in planning. This issue has come up on the council for years. Councilor Davis, it's been like her little issue, and it was never for political reasons. It was always just an issue you felt strongly about. All the people who spoke were mainly the volunteers, and I do feel for the volunteers. We're volunteers. I don't like to say to somebody, we decided we don't need your work anymore, you can't provide. So I'm really conflicted that way because I really don't like to treat volunteers that way. But I've listened to everyone tonight. I've read all the letters. I've listened to this for years. And I was supporting if Councilor Song's friendly amendment passes, because I too agree there isn't enough time to do this in that short span of time. And I think that we need to make sure that we send the volunteers who are let go a wonderful letter thanking them because the years that they've given to the town are immeasurable, and maybe we can find another place for it.
Okay, thank you. Before we get to the issue of potential friendly amendment dealing specifically with time frame, is there anybody else who wants to have a second crack?
Just wanted to clarify one thing for the record. I wasn't stating that the town has been led astray by the process.
No.
I was more stating that there's no evidence to show that having separate commissions is the way to go. That's all.
And my comment is by having separate, we had separate commissions, we have to do it.
Yeah.
That's all.
Neither of you were wrong.
Thanks, Greg. Okay. Again, any other comments before we start getting into the nitty-gritty of the language that's actually in the ordinance? All right. So I'm going to turn to the actual language of the ordinance. There's a Section 5, the draft ordinance now, Section 5 called implementation. And just to summarize, it says in the first paragraph that within 2 weeks, essentially the members of the two current commissions will indicate whether or not they would like to serve on a resulting combined commission. Within 30 days of the effective date of the ordinance, the council will notify each member and the alternative and the alternates as to who exactly is on the commission. Additionally, within 30, at that same deadline, 30 days from the effective date of the ordinance, the two chairs of the current commissions have to report what applications they actually have in progress and whether or not a public hearing has been held. This was to allow some specific management attention to the issue that's been raised on, well, how do we get to the end game during this transition if by statute people who have not actually been a member of a commission during a public hearing have to somehow end up as a commission member and vote. And then there was a timeline that said within 65 days we will actually take as a town, we will have our town attorney take the step of substituting if there's any pending legislation that is against either the Ledyard Zoning Commission or the Ledyard Planning Commission, we would just make it a substitute party that there's a new commission, which would then have the civil authority to be involved in that case. So having said all that, we're talking about the effective date of the ordinance, which I believe would actually come when the mayor signs it. Is that correct?
I believe the charter says it takes effect 20 days after it's been published.
Okay.
So once it's signed,
So the mayor has to sign it.
has to then publish it in the paper saying that it's been approved. And then I believe the charter, I'm not quite sure, but I think it's about a 20-day window.
So in theory, the mayor could sign it tonight if the
Right.
council approved it. And then, so then it has to get in the paper, which not only takes at least a few days. And then there's a 20-day period. Then it would become effective. And so all of these timelines would stack up on the back end of what is nominally at least 3 weeks. So all of these timelines, as you will read them, are actually at least 3 weeks longer due to the simple administration of getting to an effective date of the ordinance. Okay. So with that said, you are the one, Councilor Soms
Yeah.
indicated you thought more time was
So-
necessary, so.
So there is not a 65-day window to approve an application. There's a 30 or 35-day window to have a public hearing. I'm going to ask the chair if we could ask Mr. Treaster to help me with this.
Yeah, well, you're right. The 35 days from the time you accept the application for a public hearing. You have 35 days to close the public hearing, and then 65 days after you close the public hearing to render a decision.
And before that period, that 30 to 35 days? 35. Before that 35, is there a period in there?
You accept the application, 35 days to close the public hearing, 65 days to render a decision.
When you say accept, does that mean they hand it in, or do you
When-
have to go to accept it?
When the commissions accept the application, and from that point.
That's not correct.
It could be longer. I mean, when you do all the numbers, it could be from the time a developer or any property owner or anybody comes in and says, all right, I have an application I want to drop on your desk. It could be up to 180 days. And then when you stack it all together, because it's just the statutory timeframes, and there's an opportunity to delay, especially if both sides agree, the commission and the applicant say, yeah, fine, we'll put it off. And so the issue that you were raising, which is a valid issue, but I don't think it's possible to write an ordinance that could pin this down and say, look, there's a date certain. If you write it this way, there's a date certain, well, there'll be nothing pending. I mean, we could write it to say, it's all going to happen magically on, day 120, and on day 99, somebody comes in and they drop an application. The clock is ticking. So what do you want to do?
I'm thinking, let's say that it's a 180-day maximum window. Let's assume that for now. I'm thinking that any pending applications, any in process, have to be heard by the zoning commission through their entirety. Let's say that's 180 days. Any new applications should be heard by the planning and zoning commission.
The problem with that is that runs you into just the opposite problem. If I'm a developer and I drop an application on the 1st of August that says I want to do whatever, and we decide to have the new planning and zoning commission, when we still have an old zoning commission, you got two commissions, who's the right one? I mean, I just go, when I don't get the right answer, I just go argue to the court that, this was all an illegal statutory scheme of having two commissions. I mean, the bottom line is the statutes clearly allow us as a town to decide to do what this ordinance would have us do, which is combine the commissions. The statutes also lay out all of these timeframes that make it impossible for us to lay out a scenario for combining them that is fail-safe in the event of any potential hypothetical permit application process. It just can't work.
We're not combining.
Oh.
We're giving the role of zoning
Right.
to planning. So new application is heard by planning.
But
That's zoning responsibility.
But the problem is if you have an application that spits up by default, by zoning regulations, if they don't accept the application, it automatically gets accepted.
Right.
So you could never, you could extend this timeline out for 3 years and never meet it.
My point would be this. I come in on the 1st of August as a developer, hypothetical, and I drop an application for a zoning, something for that, dealing with zoning, special permit, whatever it is. Okay, and, within 35 days, you've got to have a public hearing before the zoning commission. Well, who's that going to be? All right, it's either the current zoning commission or it's the new one. You've either combined, okay, and then.
Planning took on the role.
So I think I understand what Sean's saying. Suppose Sean doesn't like that decision by them. He said, well, wait a minute, there's another zoning commission. Why can't I go to them?
You want to have an application, which commission has?
What we can't do is have on 35 days within the 1st of August, have, Sullivan's zoning application being heard by the new zoning commission. And then, so that's going to happen sometime late August, early September. And then sometime late in September, early October, we have the old zoning commission still acting on other applications. Then you got two zoning commissions doing zoning work. You can't do that.
Why don't we have a moratorium?
We can't.
I mean, absent any concrete information that this is a problem. And I'm not saying if you wanted to just add 30 days to everything, fine. I mean, but absent any indication that the basic timeline is a problem, I'm not sure why we want to wrestle with trying to get to perfection. I don't think perfection is possible. I think we're just going to have to deal with the issues as they arise. I think there will be issues. If you want to make it more lenient, give it more time developers may come in and we may say, look, here's the issue. Would you work with us?
Right.
Would you take your thing back?
Right.
And drop it again in 2 months? I mean, that may happen, especially with developers. Okay, the personal property owner, the homeowner, a little bit different story. They usually come in, they want an answer tomorrow.
And the other thing that this does, the ordinance does allow, is that if there is something that's left over from the zoning commission that needs to be continued to hear, it does say that, hey, previous zoning commission members, you're now a temporary member to hear this final through on the planning and zoning commission. It does, in the second paragraph there, it tells you that the town council may make temporary appointments of alternates, and such temporary alternates may therefore thereafter be seated as necessary to ensure such outstanding application will be acted upon by members present at the public hearing. So the ordinance allows for. Now, I don't disagree with maybe extending this out to 95 days or something
So
like that.
why don't we extend it out? We can't do something more elegant. Elegant means check and screw it. So let's just extend the days.
If we were to take everything that is a date that says within X days and added 30 to that, would that be happy? Okay.
Why would argue that we wouldn't want to do that? Why would we want to wait 45 days to pull the current members? And I don't necessarily disagree with 95 days in the end.
Right,
But to have us be in limbo for 45 days, wondering whether the current members are going to. So I would say the first 4 days, which is the 2 weeks polling, 30 days to tell us what's going on, gives us time. And then if you want to change a date, you change just the 65 days to 95 days.
Well,
It allows us, as the council, to understand who is willing to come forward and continue on a combined commission, and then give us time to assess that and then deal with it, as opposed to
okay. So
taking that time.
So let's say no one from zoning, worst case, no one from zoning says, okay, I'll serve. Because we can't, number one, we've only got, how many openings on the plan? One. So.
But then that also, how many of the planning members will continue too?
Yeah, so if, right now there's one opening, that means we can accept one zoning commissioner to step on. If, in the worst case, if a planning commission member steps down, that gives us another one. Whoever steps on brings experience. The rest have to get it. So the rest need time to come up to speed on the regulations.
I'm not arguing the 95 days. What I'm arguing, why would we want to wait 45 days to have that answer? Sure, if we change every date out of 30 days, all I'm saying is these first 3 paragraphs remain the same. We just extend the end date for the final paragraph to 95 days, so that we know.
In actuality, that works out better because then it gives the current planning commission members that much longer to understand exactly. So give them another 30 days.
Have Eric or Mike polled their members to see how many would be willing to serve on a combined commission?
Unofficially.
Huh?
Unofficially.
That was a yes.
Okay, so we have some expertise.
When I looked at this ordinance, I looked at what was written against Connecticut General Statute, Section 87 Delta, which deals with time frames. And true, if you're going to have a public hearing, you get 35 days to convene the public hearing and do all that. And you have 65 days to get the judgment done, but you can extend the whole process for as much as 65 days someplace else. So I looked at the dates that were there in the statute, and my comment to Councilor Soms today is the relief I would want would be on the effective date, because I didn't quite understand. The mayor signs it, it gets posted in the paper in 20 days. Well, that adds another month. So I agree with Counselor Krantz, let's go find out who wants what. Let's go do the 30-day stuff immediately. Whether, as soon as you pass it, we can go do that. I don't need an effective date to go get that information for you. At the same time, Mr. Treaster and I can sit down with the statutory timelines, lay the applications that are in-house against those timelines, and it's on our website. We can get that pretty quick. But you don't know what's going to come in between now and the 19th of July, which is planning's next meeting. So the 19th of July becomes an acceptance date for whatever comes in. And I know I've had 2 preliminary hearings where the developers are close to being able to drop their application. I know Mr. Treaster has a couple that have talked to him that are getting ready to drop their applications. And I think that's what you need to see. But I think Mr. Franks is absolutely right that let's go get the information, let's provide the timelines, and we can do that before you have to post them in the paper, I think.
Okay, now just as a technical point here, none of these dates that I've actually read or that we've actually talked about actually say on this date.
Correct.
The commissions magically combine. The 65 date, which is the longest date, is the date where the town attorney, if there's any pending legislation, is supposed to say, hey, there's no zoning commission anymore, be the defendant in this case. It's now, tell the court it's now the planning and zoning commission. Okay. And so the presumption would be that by the 65 days after the effective date, then there actually must be a planning and zoning commission. Nothing else actually says what the date magically is, where there's a sudden change of heart.
I just have one more thing. I actually pulled up the charter, and what it does say is it says, within 10 days after the final passage, a summary of the ordinance shall be prepared and published by the town clerk. So you got 10 days there, and then it says, every ordinance, unless it shall specify a later date, shall become effective on the 21st day after such publication. So if the clerk waited and published it on the 10th day, then you have another 20 days, so that gives you 30 days. That puts you up to 95 days right there.
Well, it puts us at 95 days where we're notifying court, assuming we have any pending legislation on that time. So if we were to make it a date, an implementation date, that if we were to try to specify a date where we said, all right, this is when there's going to be a combined commission, I think it would actually be up in Section 3. Section 3 says, the Planning and Zoning Commission of the Town of Ledyard shall be served by members as provided in. So I think that would be the day, I think we would put in a preparatory phrase to the first sentence that says, on X day, as of X number of days after the effective date of this ordinance, the Planning and Zoning Commission shall be. I mean, that's basically saying, okay, that's the magic day when we are no longer having separate commissions, and we're now having a combined commission. And that magic day should allow for everything up to the legal point, or it may actually be commensurate with the legal point, because the day when separate commissions become one should also be about the same time that you would actually be substituting parties if in fact there was litigation. So I would recommend, if there is to be a friendly amendment, that we do it that way. We pick the magic number of days after the effective date, and we put it as in the beginning of Section 3, and the friendly amendment would say on the on the blank day, fill in the number following the effective date of this ordinance, and then just move on. The Planning and Zoning Commission shall be.
I'm not sure that we need to do that.
Okay.
The way I understand it, as Roxanne read it, we would basically, after 31 days, this ordinance would be in effect.
Right.
At that point, all of these other dates become effective.
Yeah, but
And the rest of the ordinance, as Kevin pointed out, we have stipulations in here that allow for alternate members, for various people from the commissions to sit and to rule on whatever they may have heard beforehand. So I think after the 31 days, we effectively have 96 days for the items in Section 5. So I don't think that we need to actually specify a date. I think this ordinance covers it pretty well.
I think
The members, assuming we follow these dates, just as whoever's going to be on the new combined commission has to go through, I'll have to go through, the admin would have to send them to the full council, the full council would have to vote, then those people have to get sworn in. Then they have to, okay, then we have a council. So we would have to go through that. Then we have a commission. We'd have to go through that administration. Yeah, exactly how and when that all happens is a little bit fuzzy in here, but I think it's fuzzy, probably intentionally. It's very hard to write something that says exactly this, who's going to show up to get sworn in. Yes.
I would argue that this is very similar to an ordinance we had brought before us in the last meeting before, which had an implied date down in a future paragraph and didn't state in front of you, amended that one to have the same similar language. We need to do that to align it on basically the same preparatory phrase within X number of days of the effective date of this ordinance at the beginning of Section 3 to align with the notification required of the town attorney. Because that is when the town attorney was making notifications in that commission. So that same phrase, I think, needs to go up into Section 3.
Okay, so we're talking now two separate issues. And issue number one is whether we put anything in here, and if so, it sounds to me like, at least for you and I, we put it there at the beginning of Section 3. Then the second question is, what's the day? I mean, if we said 65, is that long enough? Given that you now know that 65 really probably translates to more like 95, and given the other requirements.
So in Section 1, it starts out saying 60 days after the effective date. So maybe that's the easiest, simplest place to put it. Because later on, when it starts talking about 65 days, that's the town attorney notifying. We're done.
I apologize, I missed that first date.
Yeah.
Great.
So
Section 1 already talks about it.
if we just change Section 1 and call it whatever day we like, I'm suggesting longer than 60 days.
Okay.
Who's that?
I'll just even, I would change 60th day to 95th day. And then at the same time, the notification would be 95 days.
Right. So we start at the same time, as soon as possible. Give ourselves more time for people to come up to speed, figure out the application and the process, manage through that 95 days like you were.
All right, so I'm hearing that Section 1, first sentence, second line, where it says on the 60th day that the friendly amendment would change 60th day to the 95th day.
Correct.
And I'm hearing that in Section 5.
Actually, we change it to the 90th, because I think the intent was the town attorney 5 days later.
Okay, so the friendly amendment is to change 60th to 90th in Section 1, and to change in Section 5, paragraph 1, 2, 3, 4, change within 65 days to within 95 days.
Yes.
Okay, that is the friendly amendment.
I think that's a real important change, because we're also forgetting this is going to be summertime, and a lot of people are going to be taking vacation.
Right.
And, we're going to need to get these commissioners up to speed, and we can't be having meetings and training sessions with people around.
I have to prove no vacations.
Yeah, but you'll be gone soon.
Quickly, Chairman.
Does that also imply that we're asking staff to hold off the 10 days and the 21 days before this becomes the effective date?
No.
Well, 21 days is in
That's my charter.
That's
charter.
what we can't do.
10 days is fungible depending on.
No. What I'm saying is we have up to 10 days. And then we have up to 21 days.
No, we have 21 days, period. That's
21 days is not,
that's
is
fixed.
non-negotiable, it's a choice.
10 days is.
The 10 days is the
fungible.
leeway, that's the fungible, that up to 10 days, is what the town clerk can post it, the 21 days is by chart.
Could be Friday or it could be a week from Friday.
Right, it's 21 days. Cool.
21 days.
Chart.
So it's.
So it doesn't become effective right now.
Okay, so we had a friendly amendment. Roxanne, did you fully get
Yeah,
friendly?
I got it. In the first section, we're going to change it to read commencing on the 90th day. And then section 5, fourth paragraph, is going to say within 95 days. Those are the two changes.
So, is there any other discussion on the proposed ordinance as amended? Hearing none. Roxanne, please call the roll.
Mr. Sullivan?
Yes.
Mrs. Wadecki?
Yes.
Mrs. Davis?
Yes.
Mr. Dombrowski?
Yes.
Mr. Eichelberg?
Yes.
Mr. France?
Yes.
Mrs. McGrattan?
Yes.
Mr. Soms?
Yes.
8 in favor, 0 opposed.
Motion passes. The ordinance is adopted. Okay, new business. Before we get to new business, I'd like to amend the posted agenda. We had an item 9 dealing with granting approval to the Municipal Building Committee to handle the proposed police facility initiative. I'd like to actually delete that, because that I do not believe it is necessary, and replace it with the following. Proposed motion to appoint Lieutenant Michael Finkelstein as a temporary member of the Permanent Municipal Building Committee as a municipal representative for the proposed police facility initiative.
That's what mine is.
That's what yours says, but it didn't say that 24 hours ago.
So posted, you're adding this to the posted agenda.
Yes. In other words,
This is the posted amended agenda. That's what
No,
it is.
well, actually, I told me to update it, so I did.
right, no. See, this is the law requires posting of the agenda 24 hours in advance.
Second.
24 hours ago, it didn't say that. Okay, so there's a motion and a second to amend the agenda. Roxanne, call the roll.
Mrs. Wadecki?
Yes.
Mrs. Davis?
Yes.
Mr. Dombrowski?
Yes.
Mr. Eichelberg?
Yes.
Mr. France?
Yes.
Mrs. McGrattan?
Yes.
Mr. Soms?
Yes.
Mr. Sullivan?
Yes.
8 in favor, 0 opposed.
Okay, the motion passes and the amended is agended.
The agenda is amended.
Whatever.
It's a short time.
It's 10 minutes to 9.
Let's get going.
I'm already late. We're just getting into business. Okay, new business. Are these 3 items on the consent
Yes,
calendar?
they are, and I'll move it.
Very well. Okay, we have a motion and a second to move the consent calendar. Roxanne, please call the roll.
Mrs. Davis?
Yes.
Mr. Dombrowski?
Yes.
Mr. Eichelberg?
Yes.
Mr. France?
Yes.
Mrs. McGrattan?
Yes.
Mr. Soms?
Yes.
Mr. Sullivan?
Yes.
Mrs. Wadecki?
Yes.
8 in favor, 0 opposed.
Okay, new business item 4, admin.
Move to adopt the proposed stormwater ordinance as contained in the draft dated May 2nd, 2012.
Second.
Okay, very briefly, we're required to have an ordinance in order to comply with some federal guidelines. We have an ordinance. We had a public hearing tonight. We had absolutely no speakers. I believe the ordinance is non-controversial. Anybody wish to comment? Roxanne, please go ahead. I'm sorry, was there?
I have questions on the ordinance.
Go ahead.
You're supposed to ask those questions in the public hearing earlier tonight.
No?
I was not allowed, well, actually, the chair, I was ready to say the chair was quick to close the public hearing, so there was no comment from the.
Moving
Go
on.
ahead.
Permission granted to speak.
Thank you, sir. I have another. First, the section 3 applicability, it's implied that it's Tyler, but do we need to define what the location of the storm drainage system is that is impacting the town of Ledyard? And the second part of that section, it says, unless explicitly exempted by the mayor, but I don't see anything in here on how the mayor accepts anything, or what it means to exempt and how the mayor does it.
Okay, as to the first one, since the town council has no jurisdiction outside of the town of Ledyard, we could put something in there, but I think by exactly, we can't legislate on any drainage system in either Preston or Groton or wherever, so by definition, yeah, it only applies to Ledyard drainage systems. Now, the second question was what?
related to the end of that, it says, unless explicitly exempted by the mayor, and there is no process or discussion of how the mayor exempts something or what he's exempting that I read in the ordinance.
Probably because EPE doesn't allow the mayor to do it, they put it in the boilerplate ordinance.
Yes, I think the boilerplate.
Okay. This was telling the mayor can exempt something, and there's no process for how he does that, or what he can exempt.
Right.
Which means, in other words, he's not really going to be able to exempt anything anyway.
Well, so I guess the question would be whether or not we should strike those words, or, because otherwise it would sound like we would be some sort of process that who knows what that would need to be. Yes, Councilor Eichelberg.
Mr. Maslin provides in the background, in one of your links there, that this was adopted from the town of Durham and that he has attached a handbook put out by the New England Interstate Water Pollution Control Commission, and that Durham followed the model very closely in drafting their ordinance.
And Durham also submitted it for legal review.
Well, none of that avoids the practical question that I think Councilor France is raising, which is, all right, so, suppose there's some issue, and, the developer has the issue with stormwater drainage, and the developer happens to be a friend of the mayor, and the mayor exempts him. Is that okay?
We vote him out.
Well, we can't do that. We've been there and tried that one. I mean, no, but I tend to agree. I don't like language that.
You're giving the mayor authority, but you're not telling him what the limits of his authority are, nor how he executes it.
Well, there is a provision in Section 7 which says that the commencement, conduct, or continuance of any illegal discharge to the storm drainage system is prohibited except as follows in paragraph 2, subparagraph 2, talks about discharges specified in writing by the mayor as being necessary to protect the public health and safety. And 3 talks about written notification to the mayor for some sort of dye testing. I think, I would say that those are actually doing what we were looking for.
That's not what it says. Basically, number 2 says he can exempt anything he wants, and there's no process for how he does that.
But, well, I think the mayor would, if the mayor specified in writing that this discharge is necessary to protect the public health and safety, then it's exempted.
Okay. All right. The next deals with that paragraph 3, the dye testing. Written notification prior to the time of the test, but there's no requirement that the mayor actually receives it, or is confirmation of receipt that just never happens. So somebody could claim that they made notification, but there's no positive response that was received. And I don't know what the issue is, what's the requirement for notification, and why are we notifying the mayor, and why is there no positive
There's
confirmation?
plenty of case law on the issue we're raising, which is Party A claims they notified Party B, and Party B claims they never received notification. So my guess is that the court trying to interpret this would imply that, and it's probably not worth our effort to go to the.
Party A is going to send a certified return receipt and have proof that they sent it.
Otherwise, they can't prove that they actually sent it.
It's true. There's through 2 other methods allowed in the ordinance that don't have receipt.
Yeah, but electronic, people can trace electronic mail, find out if you really sent it. Same with faxes.
All right. Under Section 8, there's plenty of definitions up front, but they don't define what an emergency situation is. Allows the mayor to suspend storm drainage system discharge access from the ordinance. It doesn't define what those emergencies are, or if there's a limit on what the mayor can determine as an emergency.
The emergencies is defined from A to D.
Yes.
Okay. Those defined elsewhere.
It's defined elsewhere.
Okay.
He's thinking the mayor's going to take all this power.
Right, when it actually says that the mayor can.
He's like delegated, he said delegate to Steve Maslin, so it's not even going to be involved in it.
quick, Councilor Preston? He's asking a reasonable
He's
question.
asking a reasonable question.
Under section 11, it's, where is the requirement for a stormwater pollution prevention plan? It says the best management practices shall be a part of the stormwater pollution prevention plan as necessary for compliance. And do we have it?
The engineer plans it on all applications and stuff like that, doesn't they talk about them making best management plan practices? So it has to be shown up on the.
It's defined.
It's defined.
Stormwater pollution prevention plan shall be a document describing the best management practices and activities. So,
And
That's it, one more, right?
It's the, under section 14, they talk about a deadline established, and essentially, it basically implies everybody's going to play nice, we're all going to agree what the deadline is. Are there guidelines established somewhere what that deadline is? If the town says, and the mayor that says, this is our deadline, and the other side of the party doesn't agree,
Look, you have to refer back to.
Well, no,
Is it-
I think in that case, it follows the state law on the administrative procedures of violations that has a specific process where you're supposed to notify somebody, and then and you have to do it by mail, and then within a period of time, they get to ask for a hearing. There's a whole state statute on how we actually tell somebody that they're in violation and enforce it. Are there any other questions?
No, I have more of a question.
Then, Roxanne, please call the roll.
There's no changes.
No changes.
Okay. Mr. Dombrowski?
Yes.
Mr. Eichelberg?
Yes.
Mr. France?
Yes.
Mrs. McGrattan?
Yes.
Mr. Soms?
Yes.
Mr. Sullivan?
Yes.
Mrs. Wadecki? Mrs. Davis?
Yes.
8 in favor, 0 opposed.
Okay, the motion passes. Item 5, Edmund.
I'll move to appoint Mr. David Leach, Republican of 3 Osprey Drive, Gales Ferry, as an alternate member to the Inland Wetlands and Watercourses Commission for a 2-year term ending October 31st, 2012, filling a vacancy left by Mr. Lamb.
Second.
Okay, any discussion? Questions? Okay, Roxanne, please call the roll.
Mr. Eichelberg?
Yes.
Mr. France?
Yes.
Mrs. McGrattan?
Yes.
Mr. Soms?
Yes.
Mr. Sullivan?
Yes.
Mrs. Wadecki?
Yes.
Mrs. Davis?
Yes.
Mr. Dombrowski?
Yes.
8 in favor, 0 opposed.
Motion passes. Item 6, Edmund.
I will move to appoint Mr. Peter Gardner, Republican of 72 Inchcliff Drive, Gales Ferry, to the Permanent Municipal Building Committee for a 3-year term ending March 26, 2015, filling a vacancy left by Ms. Kaminsky.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Okay, Roxanne, please call the roll.
Mr. France?
Yes.
Mrs. McGrattan?
Yes.
Mr. Soms?
Yes.
Mr. Sullivan?
Yes.
Mrs. Wadecki?
Yes.
Mrs. Davis?
Yes.
Mr. Dombrowski?
Yes.
Mr. Eichelberg?
Yes.
8 in favor, 0 opposed.
Motion passes. Item 7, Edmund.
I will move to adopt the proposed resolution authorizing the Ledyard Town Center Committee to continue their efforts to encourage economic development in Ledyard Center as contained in the draft dated June 1st, 2012.
Second.
Any discussion?
Is there, one point for reasons or limited to 2 years?
It has
See,
been 1 year.
Yeah, we've actually bumped it out.
The funny history of that, of course, it was supposed to be a 1-year group, and they were so enthusiastic we continued it. And my only regret is when we named the committee.
You can make it permanent.
We just kind of named it like, well, what should we name this committee? Oh, we'll just call it the Ledyard Center Committee. We could have named it something a little fluffier or something, you know. But
Emergency task force.
that's
Well, I think the short story is we like what they've done.
Yes.
You want to keep them enthusiastic.
Regroup. All right. Any other comment, question, discussion?
I would like to, looking at the actual document itself.
Oh gosh, actually reading.
I most certainly did. And this is kind of directed to the mayor. Number 8, determine the market value of town-owned property in Ledyard Center. What's going on with the firehouse?
We shall shortly be erecting a sign there, a for sale sign.
We are?
Oh, absolutely. ADC we've discussed that with them. We're in the process of preparing a sign for the former Gales Ferry School and this property.
The last council action was to authorize EDC to market the property.
Yes.
So-
Did we?
The last council action, the last time the issue was to the council was asked to give permission to the EDC to market the property. We gave permission, right, we gave permission to the EDC to market the property. And so they're similarly actively putting up the sign.
Well, I was commissioner and I asked for that permission.
Well, I understand. I didn't say we were doing it quickly. I did say.
Well, what I'm asking is, did we lose all interest from Mr. Bill Sweeney? That was the
Developers never lose interest. Developers are just, the proposal that's been considered for a while there, as far as I know, it's still active. Everything is they're always active.
Okay. Any other questions on the proposed
Okay,
resolution?
going down to number 10, it says work with the planning commission. We gonna need to change that, the wording?
No, because the commission that we have will be fulfilling the statutory duties of the planning commission, so that language is will translate.
Okay.
Right. Any other issues or questions? All right, Roxanne, please call the roll.
Mrs. McGrattan?
Yes.
Mr. Soms?
Yes.
Mr. Sullivan?
Yes.
Mrs. Wadecki?
Yes.
Mrs. Davis?
Yes.
Mr. Dombrowski?
Yep.
Mr. Eichelberg?
Yes.
Mr. France?
Yes.
8 in favor, 0 opposed.
Motion passes. Item 8, finance.
Motion to appropriate $2,963 from FEMA reimbursement check number 137-82286 to account 006-0425-200-0095-0000, Galesbury Fire District Equipment Reserve.
Second.
This is I believe, the final reimbursement from FEMA. Going to the appropriate account.
Final one is going to their reserve account, is going to be used to fix the generator.
Any other questions, comments, discussion? Roxanne, please call the roll.
Mrs. McGrattan?
Yes.
Mr. Soms?
Yes.
Mr. Sullivan?
Yes.
Mrs. Wadecki?
Yes.
Mrs. Davis?
Yes.
Mr. Dombrowski?
Yes.
Mr. Eichelberg?
Yes.
Mr. France?
Yes.
8 in favor, 0 opposed.
Motion passes. Item 9, I move to appoint Lieutenant Michael Finkelstein as a temporary member of the Permanent Municipal Building Committee as a municipal representative for the proposed police facility initiative.
Second. Fine choice.
Okay, the ordinance provides that we may appoint temporary members for specific projects. So that's what this appointment is for. Any other questions, comments, discussion? Roxanne, please call the roll.
Mr. Soms?
Yes.
Mr. Sullivan?
Yes.
Mrs. Wadecki?
Yes.
Mrs. Davis?
Yes.
Mr. Dombrowski?
Yes.
Mr. Eichelberg?
Yes.
Mr. France?
Yes.
Mrs. McGrattan?
Yes.
8 in favor, 0 opposed.
Motion passes. Item 10, discussion regarding summer meeting schedule. Unless there is other comment or objection, I intend to have only one meeting each for the months of July and August, and it would be what would normally be scheduled as our second meeting of the month. So the first meeting of the month will be canceled. We will meet on the 4th Wednesday in July before the Wednesday. Seeing no objection, then
Motion to adjourn.
So it's
Without
Wednesday,
objection.
25th of July, and Wednesday, 22nd.
correct. Without objection, we are adjourned.
They don't have really good reception. You're going to let us know the day of the call.
I will let you know that I think it's the 14th.